Welcome, all of you, to yet another exciting episode in our series of this conversation with Dr. Ashish Pradhan. Dr. Pradhan is a distinguished medical leader, and we have been talking to him about neuroscience and spirituality and meditation. We have talked about the nervous system, including the brain, and today we welcome him to talk to him about the second and the third energy centers. Welcome, Dr. Ashish.
Thank you. Nice to be back, Monica ji.
Yeah, definitely. So, without any delay, let's take the first question that we have for you. And we would definitely like to know any relationship that exists between the autonomic nervous system and the second and the third energy centers.
Thank you, Monica ji. So, the second energy center basically is referred to as the Swadhisthana chakra. The second energy center essentially governs the functioning of the aortic plexus, which is the corresponding plexus within the autonomic nervous system. As we had said in the first episode, it's the pelvic plexus that corresponds to the first energy center, the Muladhara chakra. Likewise, the second energy center, the so-called Swadhisthana chakra, corresponds to it basically governs the activity of the aortic plexus. The aortic plexus essentially is present in front of the lower part of the aorta, and through its branches, it governs the functioning of the pelvic viscera or the pelvic organs, which comprise, for example, the rectum, the urinary bladder in both males and females, and say for example, in the female body, also looks after the functioning of the reproductive organs, such as the uterus, the fallopian tubes. As we had also said during the first episode, that the autonomic nervous system, comprising of two components, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, it's like this, the origin is in the brain. It's like an inverted tree. We had spoken about that, with roots in the brain and the branches kind of come downwards. So the parasympathetic and the sympathetic essentially work very close to each other. They're the two main components of it. And one thing that we should remember, even as we look at these chakras, the first energy center which we did before, the second and the third energy centers with which we are going to talk about today, and the energy centers above that, they all function as one unit. It's a holistic unit. If we start adopting a kind of a Cartesian frame of approach, then the audience would be misinformed, and it's something that I would like to share with the audience, that we should look upon our entire system, all these seven so-called energy centers or chakras, as well as the nervous system, because the nervous system functions as one unit. It is not discrete. It has component parts to it, but it still functions in harmony in its governance. So that's the second energy center and the corresponding plexus, which is once again the aortic plexus.
So now, Dr. Pradhan, it seems that the void may not be an energy center, as is depicted in the human subtle system, but do tell us about that and about the correlation that it may have with the nervous system.
Sure. So before we go to the third energy center, which is the Nabhi or the Manipura chakra and the corresponding plexus, the void is probably one of the most intriguing and interesting aspects of the entire subtle system, and also how it corresponds to the neuroanatomy. Now, there is a lot of research that has happened, particularly in the past century, more so in the past 30-40 years, that seems to suggest that the autonomic nervous system basically comprises not of two but three components. So you have the parasympathetic component, as is represented by the vagus nerve for the most part. You have the sympathetic component, which is basically the two chains of sympathetic ganglia that essentially run close to the vertebral column, outside of it. And then there is, hold your breath, it's called the enteric nervous system, the ENS. And the ENS is now thought to be a third very important, relatively completely independent component of the autonomic nervous system. And the reason for this is that it has its own governing system that is not controlled directly from the brain. There are innervations, there is a crosstalk, but the way it functions is that you have these nerves that are basically present throughout the gut. Gut basically essentially starts from, let's say, the esophagus right up to the rectum and the anal canal, the entire gut, but basically within the abdominal cavity, you could say, you have this nervous system which has its innervations, which has its connections within the walls of the entire gut. And through that, through neurotransmitters, through nerve impulses, through these kinds of neurohormones, it basically controls in a relatively independent fashion the functioning of the entire gut. So what does that mean? Basically, when we eat something, right, you chew, you masticate basically, and then you swallow. When you swallow, that begins the process, or what enables swallowing, as we call it, is peristalsis. Peristalsis is this movement of the gut that allows food to propel from point A to point B to point C, point D, all the way down, and that is how the nutrients are absorbed from what we eat in our food, or whatever we drink basically is absorbed. So that is possible because of peristalsis. Now peristalsis is possible, this movement of the muscles of the gut is possible because of, again, we had spoken the last time around, of electrical impulses that are created within the nervous system. That's essentially what the nervous system is, it's an electrical system. So these impulses that are created within the gut are a function of the enteric nervous system. So this ENS, or the enteric nervous system, is now considered to be an independent unit. If we look at the subtle system, now this comes to the relationship with the autonomic nervous system to answer your question. If you look at a graph of the so-called subtle system that we have in our body, you notice that it starts from here, and it sort of or rather it starts from the bottom, let's say, and it stops at the second energy center, and then from the second energy center to the fourth energy center, it's like you can see a dotted kind of a line. And that, from a spiritual point of view, is considered a void. Void essentially is nothingness, that there is nothing there. And that is extraordinarily interesting because the parasympathetic nervous system, it gets a little technical, but it is of immense consequence and great sort of interest. So the parasympathetic nervous system consists of two sources of outflows, as we call it. Where does it come out from? One is the cranium, from where we have basically the middle part of the brain, the midbrain, from where the nerves kind of come out. From where also one of the cranial nerves is the vagus nerve, which comprises the major part of the parasympathetic nervous system that innervates all the organs. And then you have the sacral outflow. So you have the craniosacral outflow. So there are two sources of outflows, but there is nothing in between. And that, to me at least, is very interesting from a correlation point of view of that gap in the parasympathetic nervous system. That there is the cranial outflow and there is the sacral outflow, but there is nothing in between. It doesn't mean there are no nerves. There are nerves. The vagus basically does innervate it. But that gap, to me, corresponds to the void. So the void is not that there is nothing there. The void essentially is a way of communicating that there is this gap in the parasympathetic nervous system, and that gap needs to be bridged, if you will. So once again, in the subtle system, there is a dot dot dot, it's kind of a dotted line from the second to the fourth energy centers, with the third energy center coming in between, and that corresponds to the anatomy and the spiritual anatomy, and maybe the neuroanatomy of the nervous system. That said, back to the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system contains as many neurons. Hold your breath. As many neurons as there are neurons in the spinal cord. So you literally have billions of neurons in the gut. And that's why the gut enteric nervous system is now referred to as the second brain. So we have the brain, and now this is considered increasingly as the second brain, which is why gut health, the microbiome, the microbiota, these trillions of bacteria that live in our gut, that have been in existence with us since the time since we started our evolutionary journey. All of this, they control our mood, our emotions, our how we feel about, right? We eat good food, we feel good. If we are dyspeptic, if we are feeling something nauseated, that also impacts our mood. So increasingly, there is an understanding that the enteric nervous system, or the so-called, maybe the region that corresponds to the void, has an effect on our brain. It controls our mood, it controls our emotion, it manages our immune system as well. A lot of, say for example, inflammatory bowel disease or those kinds of diseases are now known to have that psychosomatic kind of a relationship, that inflammatory component. So there is a very sophisticated immune system that exists within the gut as well. So all of this comes together to form what may be called the void, or is called from a spiritual point of view the void, but it is anything but empty. And it has a very important role to play in our spiritual journey. So the third energy center, which is called as the Manipura chakra or the Nabhi chakra, that governs from a Sahaj point of view the action of a very well-known plexus called the solar plexus. The solar plexus in anatomy is actually called a celiac plexus, and it is kind of situated here between the umbilicus and the lower part of the sternum, but at the back of the body, sort of just kind of behind the structures that lie there. And it's called a solar plexus because if you look at it, it kind of looks like a sun with kind of nerves sort of radiating from it. And that plexus, the celiac plexus, has a number of subplexuses, and that essentially, or those plexuses, control the functioning of the organs that are kind of quote unquote, very important or very critical. Everything is important, but even more so the liver, the pancreas, the spleen. So the hepatic plexus has innervations, which is a subplexus of the celiac plexus, looks after the functioning of the liver, or is involved with that functioning. Similarly, the pancreatic plexus and the splenic plexus. And of course, the upper part of the gut, which is say the stomach, the duodenum, the jejunum, so on and so forth. So again, as I said before, the third energy center, so the second energy center and the third energy center, which is the Swadhisthana and the Nabhi, and the void, these three together, which is why we are covering them today in this episode, look after the functioning of the entire sort of organ systems, including the reproductive system, the excretory system, the kidneys, for example. They're all governed between these two energy centers through their innervations. This might be a great opportunity also to sort of understand in a very brief, like a couple of minutes, literally, couple of organs in the body that are also important from a spiritual point of view in a different way. It's kind of somewhat absurd to say that only some organs are more important than the other. That's not the point. What we are trying to say is a little different. So let's take the case of the liver, for example. Now the liver is considered a vital organ in the body. much like the heart and the brain and the kidneys, the liver is critical. It has a number of functions, but one of the most important functions, along with the fact that it produces bile and it helps to digestion in the digestion of fat, it stores the other form of glucose, that is glycogen. It has that, but the liver also detoxifies. It has a very important function in the sense that whatever food we eat, the nutrients that are absorbed from the gut first pass through the liver. It's called the portal system, the hepatic portal system, and it is where a lot of toxins are destroyed. So the liver is like your detoxification center, apart from its other aspects. In a way, as the founder of this system of meditation, Sri Mataji, has said, that the void is reflective of the ocean, and why that is so, and of the principle of the master. And the reason why that is so is that the ocean basically is something that takes in all of our toxins, and it in a way purifies them, and it is sent back to us in the form of clouds and then rain and so on and so forth. So it takes in, and of course we are polluting our oceans to a point maybe where humanity is going to face an even bigger issue, but that's outside of the purview of this discussion. But the liver, therefore, is very interesting. It therefore is kind of symbolic of that ocean within us, that takes in the toxins, purifies them, and therefore nourishes the body. So that's the liver. It has a very important place in the meditative practice. It is also considered the seat of attention. So it's very interesting in people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, ADHDs. If you check their, see their vibrations, we see that they have an issue with the third energy center, which again is it's very indicative of this issue, and is very very interesting as well. The second thing I wanted to mention today was also about the pancreas. The pancreas, as everybody knows, sits on across on the sort of the left to right side, covers in the center, uh, and it produces insulin and glucagon, two hormones that are very very important. Insulin everybody knows about because diabetes is practically part of the lexicon that we use. And insulin's main function is when you take sugar in, it drives the uptake of that glucose, of that sugar into cells. Because if that doesn't happen, that sugar is converted into fat, into triglycerides, which is the main problem these days, why we have obesity, and also eventually leads to insulin resistance, and then type 2 diabetes. So the reason why this is important from the Sahaj point of view, from the subtle system point of view, is that the brain only uses glucose as its source of energy. The muscles can use glucose, they can use fat as their source of energy. But the brain, the cells in the brain, essentially can only use glucose. And that's why when we eat something, the sugar basically helps to keep the brain going. And as you can know, when we feel low, if we eat something we feel better, that's because the sugar levels go up. uh, and that is important from a spiritual point of view as well. Why? Because if we think too much, if we work too much, if we plan too much, it starts placing stresses on these two organ systems, particularly the pancreas. And that's where the relationship between the second, the third energy center, and the void or the enteric system all come together. So these are very interesting correlations between the spiritual system, the gross anatomical system, and the functioning of the human body.
So, Dr. Pradhan, we'd also like to understand the relationship between these energy centers now and the nervous system at a human evolutionary level.
Sure. So that's again a very fascinating, very interesting question. So as we alluded, or as we referred to just a little while ago, the enteric nervous system, the ENS, is actually considered a primordial nervous system. So when bacteria, so the most primitive life forms, when they started evolving in the primordial ocean, you might say in water, they were aquatic life forms. And from there, evolution started, amphibians and then terrestrials. But if you look at the most primitive life forms and some of the most sort of more advanced amongst the aquatic life forms, multicellular organisms, what you find is that there is, when there is a kind of a gut, any kind of a system of alimentation, there is a nervous system. So the enteric nervous system actually predates the central nervous system, the organization of the central nervous system. That is sort of central command and control, if you will. So the enteric nervous system predates everything, which means that from an evolutionary point of view, the physical nourishment of the organism was very important. And that continues even today for us. If we don't eat, we suffer. But what has happened is that these energy centers, or these correlations between the spirituality of it and the evolutionary construct, is that we used to just eat, reproduce, die, eat, reproduce, die. Those were the sort of the cycles through which simple or even basic complex multicellular organisms started their life. That was the lifestyle. As the central nervous system evolved, there was a quote unquote, a higher quote unquote purpose to the existence of the organisms. Not that they started writing Shakespearean poetry, or they started painting or composing music. That happened much later with the Homo sapien. But before that, there was a gradual sort of progression. Maybe there is some rise of consciousness. We still don't know what is animal consciousness, we are thinking about it. But these energy centers basically are quote unquote allowing for the mere existence of the organism. And that is why when we talk about the mastery, the spiritual mastery that a seeker or a practitioner of meditation aspires to, is to overcome those base kind of requirements, those base kind of instincts, which is, they are important for survival, but not for a higher evolutionary purpose. And we'll talk about that as we talk about the higher energy centers, or the centers above. So what do we mean that, therefore, in a nutshell, is food important? Yes, it's important. Should we be obsessed with food? No. That spiritual evolution speaks to not just satisfying your thirst or your hunger, but to be sort of detached from it, to be able to rise above that. So when this inner energy that we spoke about in one of the first episodes, when it starts rising above the second, the third, and particularly the so-called void area, it allows the individual to achieve a different plane of evolutionary existence, where food is important, nourishment is important, but it is not the end all and be all of existence. Which is why when we read about, say, the great masters, we see that they are not conditioned, they are not obsessed. They don't just think about food all the time. From the time we get up otherwise in the morning, we just think about breakfast, then lunch, then snacks in between, then dinner, and then this continuous planning about what's the next best thing I can put in my mouth. That speaks to this very primordial, billions of years old instinct of consumption of nutrition. Whereas spirituality allows you to rise above that. Consumption of food is important, but cannot become an obsession. And that's where there is this beautiful correlation, that once we get into the meditative practice of Sahaja, we get to understand that yes, food is important, yes, consume hydration is important, eating healthy, nutritious food is critical, that you don't do stupid things to your body, but there is a higher purpose. And that higher purpose, if you will, is this realization of a higher state of awareness. And therefore, but these energy centers look after us, help us to survive, because without survival, there is, then existence comes to an end. But that is not the goal of existence. The goal of existence is not to eat like gourmet food morning, noon, and night, because that's an evolutionary conditioning. And Sahaj practice basically helps you to transcend that. It rises above the level, through the consciousness rises, let's say, from these drives, these primordial drives that we have within us. Like we said, the enteric nervous system, the drive for nutrition has come to us right from the stage when life forms were in the bacterioid stage. And that has still not disappeared. It is in fact even more sort of ingrained within us. And that's the relationship between spirituality, physiology, and the rise in or the elevation of human consciousness. Once this inner energy rises above the second, the third energy centers, and allow us that kind of mastery over the body. So if you don't eat for a few hours, it doesn't mean you collapse, other things notwithstanding. If you don't get your favorite food, it doesn't mean that you are completely upset and it doesn't taste the exact way your mom made it, or whichever your favorite restaurant makes it, and then you get upset about it. Sahaj allows you to kind of rise above that, and that is the correlation between the need for nutrition versus the obsession with it, and the ability to rise above.
Very beautiful. Yeah, very beautiful way of explaining it. So that brings us to the final question, which relates more to kind of like, our day-to-day existence and functioning. Now, what are some of the reasons that can cause issues or problems with this part of our subtle system? And maybe, how do those problems manifest at a gross level? Is there a way to, make corrections?
Sure. So we will go through this with every kind of episode. But the thing to remember again, as we said at the very beginning, Monica ji, is the whole system is holistic. There isn't that you just take care of one center and then not worry about the rest. You have to take care of the entire system, all the seven energy centers and the energy channels. Now, what causes problems, particularly with second and third energy centers, are twofold. One at the physical level, other are at the emotional level. Again, from the so-called the right side, as we say, and the so-called sort of the left side, as we say, the right and the left components of the sympathetic nervous system. One way to get these two centers, particularly at a subtle level, the Swadhisthana and the Manipura chakra, stressed out, is, as we said, you think too much, you plan too much, you work too much, you get stressed out. That can cause, you chase money for its own sake. Everybody needs money, but if you start getting obsessed with it, with materialism, excess of it, uh, how much does a person really need? It's not a philosophical question, it's very much a practical question. And what are you doing to get to that? There's a honest, straightforward way of earning your living, and then there are nefarious ways of doing it, and many people do that. So at that subtle level, even if you are earning money, it starts affecting these energy centers. The other thing, as we said, is if you think too much, that can create, that gives rise to, now the very interesting thing is, the kidney produces a hormone called as renin. Renin gets converted into angiotensin 1, angiotensin 2, and these are, that basically modulates your blood pressure. So if you think too much, if you work too much, it's possible that through this, the sympathetic nervous system gets activated. More adrenaline is secreted if you work hard, and then that activates also the renin angiotensin system, and that's how your blood pressure can go up. So likewise, you see immediately there is a relationship between the second and the third energy center and the fourth energy center, which essentially controls your heart. So as we said, the whole system is integrated. So one of the ways to sort of keep these energy centers in balance is to lead a balanced lifestyle. It's not tautology. It's to say, okay, if how much am I satisfied? It speaks to that principle of mastery within us. Am I happy? Am I content? Am I making the lives of those around me, happy, or am I making it miserable? How much of a drive do I have? And then, as we saw, the brain does use glucose as a form of energy. If you work too hard, we know that stress can also lead to a lot of hormonal imbalances within us. The insulin and glucagon, which are these two hormones that kind of work in consonance with each other. One increases sugar levels, the other drops it down. that can lead to insulin spikes if if you eat too much, or if you eat at kind of hours that are not appropriate. Those, then that sugar gets converted to triglycerides, can lead to heart disease, so on and so forth. So all of this it's a very complex interplay. It's kind of difficult to sort of tease out the differences between the energy centers per se. They're all integrated, they all work together. But again, through Sahaj, a balanced lifestyle, maintaining a sense of personal dignity, satisfaction, and making sure that you work hard, but you also kind of take time to relax a little bit, that you give time for yourself, and that is best through meditation, that you put your system, reset it in a way, and you bring your highly adrenalized system, which can give rise to diseases, say like peptic ulcer, for example. It's caused by Helicobacter pylori, we know that, but even then it can give rise to other inflammatory bowel diseases, for example. This interaction between the immune system and the system that we spoke about before. So lots of potential disorders can be caused due to the psychosomatic relationships, but there is increasing evidence that, for example, meditative practices can help the IBD like conditions, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, uh, other kinds of disorders as well. So it's important to maintain a balance, it's important to maintain a sense of mastery, if you will. Food is important, but if you get obsessed about it, that's not nice either. And one should also know what is good for one and what isn't. So that sense of innate wisdom is also possible. So these are some of the things that can throw this system of balance, but it's both. It's on the physical side, thinking, activity, planning, over planning, and on the emotional side, or on the so-called other side, it's about avarice, it's about greed, it's about lack of satisfaction, it's about being conditioned about a particular kind of food all the time, or just driving towards it. Those are things that can cause imbalances in these energy centers. Also the so-called void, the enteric nervous system. But as you can see, it also has impact on the centers above and below it. It can cause issues with your Muladhara chakra. It can also cause issues with your heart chakra, and also the Agya chakra, which is the sixth energy center. But we'll talk about that as we go along.
Well, this information definitely is very useful in itself. And I think it also makes us realize that we need to start having that shift in our awareness and understanding, to where we start knowing ourselves, understanding ourselves in a more integrated way. And I think to that intent, this series is becoming more and more interesting and more helpful. Well, we do thank you, Dr. Ashish, for your time today, for sharing all of that valuable information. And as always, we will now take our viewers through a guided meditation by the founder of this meditation, Sri Mataji Nirmala Devi. So stay with us, and thank you, Dr. Pradhan, for your time today.
Oh, thank you very much, Marika. Always a pleasure. Look forward to the next one.
Let us see how the seeking comes within us. From where? As shown here, there is a center called as Nadhi Chakra, which is here in the center. Can you show anyone else? Nadhi. Which is placed in our spinal cord. And manifests the solar plexus, which is placed midway under your navel. This is the center that creates the seeking within us. Seeking is only possible when something is living. The little bit, if you understand, that a desire is created within a little animal called an amoeba by giving him hunger. Just think of it. It has no brain. It has just a small nucleus. But it can feel it is hungry. It has to eat something to grow. It also knows it has to reproduce. And then it starts seeking. It also knows how to take the food in, but it does not know how it digests. That part is not his job. Even for us, just the same. So the seeking starts in a little amoeba. And the whole evolution is based on that seeking, gradually improving and improving the ways and means of seeking, while the desire is that of food only, alone.
Keep your eyes closed. First of all, please put your right hand on your heart. All the time, the left hand is towards me. Now, here you have to say, in your heart, with all sincerity, Mother, am I the spirit? Ask the question 3 times in your heart. This is a very fundamental question. Now bring the right hand on to the left hand side of your stomach, in the upper part. Here press it. Now this is the center of your mastery, your guidance, your Guru Tattva as they say. So ask a question, Mother, am I my own master? This is a question to be asked 3 times. Mother, am I my own master? Now, bring your right hand down below, in the lower part of the abdomen. Now, this is the center from which all the divine work is done. All the pure work is done. So to ask 6 times, because this center has got 6 petals. Mother, please give me pure knowledge. 6 times you just ask. As a result of this asking, the Kundalini starts getting awakened. Now to help the Kundalini to rise, you have to cooperate with her. So please put your right hand on the left hand side in the upper part of your abdomen and press it on the stomach. Now here you have to say with full confidence, to help the Kundalini to rise, Mother, I am my own master. This you have to say 10 times. These are the 10 commandments which you have to say. That, Mother, I am my own master. Now, 10 times with full confidence. Now, please raise your right hand to your heart. Now, here you have to say, again with full confidence, Mother, I am the Spirit. This is the truth. You are the Spirit. But you have to say with full confidence, Mother, I am the Spirit. This you have to say 12 times. Now one has to know that God Almighty is the ocean of love. But above all, He is the ocean of forgiveness. So He forgives. Whatever wrong you do, He forgives. So don't feel guilty and put your right hand across. On the left hand side, in the corner which is made by your neck and your shoulder. Now here you have to say, again with full confidence, 16 times, Mother, I am not guilty. Please say it. Mother, I am not guilty. 16 times. I am not guilty at all. Please say it. Please say it. Very hot. Now raise your hand across on your forehead. And it's a very important center. Here you have to say from your heart, Mother, I forgive everyone. Please say it from your heart. How many times is not the point. Mother, I forgive everyone. Now some would say that it's very difficult to forgive. But it's a myth that we do not forgive or we forgive. We do not do anything in both the cases. But if we don't forgive, then we play into wrong hands. So please say from your heart, Mother, I forgive everyone. Now please take your hand on the back agya, the same center, on the back side of your head and allow your head to rest on it and push it back a little bit. Now here, you have to say, for your satisfaction, because you always feel guilty, that, O Divine, if I have done anything wrong, please forgive me. Please forgive me. From your heart. Stretch your hand fully and put your center of your palm on top of the fontanelle bone area, which was a very soft bone in your childhood. Press it hard. Press hard your scalp. Now you have to move it 7 times, saying one thing, which you have to ask for. Mother, please give us my self-realization, because I cannot force on you. So you have to ask for it. 7 times, press it hard and move it 7 times, very hard. slowly, saying that